Hi everyone, my name is Ashland and I'm going to be presenting your first workshop for your retreat today. And it is called Back to Basics, Breaking Down the QI and Writing Fundamentals, Refreshing Our Knowledge of Scientific Research, Writing, and Learning How to Begin the Writing Process. So let's go ahead and begin. So I first wanted to give you an overview of what we're going to be going over today in today's workshop. And so we're going to quickly break down the elements of IMRAD. We're going to also go over the elements of the Quality Improvement Initiative, or the QI. We're going to talk about writing as thinking. We're going to talk about the drafting process. And we're also going to go over how to read like a writer. All right, so firstly, let's go over the IMRAD, which is an acronym which stands for Introduction, Methodology, Results, and Discussion. And while the QI has its own genre specification, a lot of it's going to still coincide with the basic acronym of IMRAD. And as we go on in this workshop, I will clarify what makes the QI distinct from scientific research writing. But the IMRAD is traditionally the framework of most scientific research writing. Right. So the Quality Improvement Initiative, or the QI, the goal of the genre is to apply a systematic approach to designing, testing, and implementing changes through real-time measurement for improvement. Or in more practical terms, you're going to be identifying a problem, introducing a solution, and documenting how you implement that solution and recording the data. Okay, so before you begin your QI, you want to make sure that you're asking yourself good questions. And good questions are going to create something called methodological congruence. And that is a flow between each section of the IMRAD or the QI, that introduction, that methods, and so on and so forth. So good questions are going to be focused on a single problem. They're going to be feasible under the circumstances. They're going to be researchable through primary and secondary sources. They're going to be relevant to your field and specific and complex enough to develop a thorough answer. So before we can even begin the writing process of the QI, we need to make sure that our questions are strong questions that are going to produce ultimately a really strong paper. So the first section of the QI, and also the first letter in the acronym IMRAD, is the introduction. And the introduction is going to answer the question, why is this important? It's going to identify a gap in what we currently know and what we need to know to achieve the desired QI outcomes. It describes applicable scholarship in a literature review, and it explains the importance and relevance of the study beyond the author's site. And what that means, and we'll go over this in a later slide, but context is incredibly important to the QI. And so in your introduction, that's where you step out of the context and explain why it's universal and why it's relevant for people in a larger medical community. You also want to include a rationale as to why the intervention is expected to work, or an explanation of the framework, model, or theory that guided the study. Again, we will go over those a bit more deeply in our methods section. And it's going to end with an aim statement, or some of you might call that a statement of purpose. All right, so the aim statement illustrates what you hope to achieve with your QI initiative. It needs to make an assertive claim. Essentially, it's going to operate like a thesis. It's 1 to 2 sentences at the end of your introduction section, and you want to make sure that your aim statement is SMART. That's specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. And I want to go ahead and take a second here to talk about the time, which is really important and specific to the QI paper. So essentially what the QI is preoccupied with is not only the implementation, but how that implementation is done over time and the data that that produces with each re-implementation, right? So as you start this QI process, you want to keep in mind that whatever your solution is, however you hope to implement it, you want to make sure that it can be successful within the time parameters you are given. So that's something you should be thinking about at the very beginning. And you're going to see as we continue in this workshop that time is going to come up again and again. All right, so the literature review is also a part of the introduction section, and that's going to summarize the relevant scholarship. It identifies gaps or new possibilities for additions to, elaborations on, or applications of existing work. Literature is often peer-reviewed work on a specific topic. Review is the research, analysis, and discussion of sources. The literature review is discussing your sources and describing how they interact with each other and pertain to your work. So the literature review is going to be an important part because it's also going to show you to be a credible author, right? That you've gone out into your field's literature, that you've read extensively, and that you can position this study, this paper, in relation to the relative literature. So it establishes your credibility. It also endears you to the academic community. So it's important to do your research and to understand how your study is in communication with other literature. All right, so now we are at the QI method section, or the M in the acronym IMRAD. And so the methods section answers the question, what did or will you do? It should include enough detail that it can be replicated. It establishes the context of your project. It describes the measures and instruments used in studying the intervention, and it often ends with a statement of ethics. And we're going to go over all those things a little bit more deeply as we continue on. All right, so the context is really specific to the QI. It's really a hallmark of this paper in this genre. And this lets the reader know if the intervention is applicable in their own setting. For example, is it applicable in their hospital? Why or why not? Is it applicable in a classroom? Why or why not? Some potential details to include would be healthcare setting, patient population and size, staffing, type of practice, teaching status of the institution, system of affiliation, and care processes relevant to your study. So measures and instruments are an important part of your method section. It is important to demonstrate how you tested, refined, and implemented your intervention. So I want to go ahead and point out that refinement word one more time, because the QI is concerned with that refinement. Just as much as it's concerned with time, it's concerned with refinement. Essentially, what it wants to see is that you are implementing, collecting data, and adjusting your implementation if need be, and therefore your data collected over the course of this paper is going to be really dynamic because it's been measured over time. So an example of one of those refinements in terms of methodology is going to be the PDSA cycles, the Plan, Do, Act, Study cycles. So measures should be quantitative. That's going to be tests, statistics, logistics, but also qualitative, interviews, questionnaires, focus groups. And those two kinds of information are going to create a really diverse and rich study and therefore paper. Again, there's always unique situations where maybe quantitative is only necessary or qualitative is only necessary, and that's really up to you as the author to decide. But typically it's going to be nice to have both. Again, authors need to report how changes were tested and refined over time. So you'll hear those words again, refinement and time. All right, so another important quality of the method section of the QI is going to be framework or rationale. So the goal of the QI is to apply a theory to your QI, which is a clear explanation between your solution and the problem you are hoping to solve. So some common frameworks used are going to be those PDS cycles. I mentioned this slide before. They can be the model for improvement, also experience-based co-design. There are other methodologies, frameworks, and rationales that can be used. These are three of the most popular, but essentially how I like to think of the framework is it is the wheel that is providing movement in these studies and therefore the paper, because it's going to be generating really complex and dynamic data. So really keep in mind that choosing the correct rationale, choosing the right framework is important to the study and ultimately the writing of the paper documenting the study. All right, so lastly, in your method section, you typically want to end with a statement of ethics. This can be in the form of a formal ethics review or conflicts of interest. What I think is really interesting about the QI is that in a traditional IMRAD paper, you really want to distance yourself from bias. But a QI has the contextual element that's really crucial to this genre, but the ethics kind of works as the non-bias in a way, meaning that it is a larger value system that you are still injecting into this paper. And so you want to keep that in mind, like what ethics were in play or what ethics did you need to consider as you were doing the course of this study. All right, so now we were at the QI results section, or the R in IMRAD, and that's going to answer the question, what actually happened and what did you see or observe? It's going to describe the initial intervention, its implementation over time, and any changes made to the intervention over the course of the study. It can include before-after comparisons and run charts or control charts, which are going to show that data over time. Typically, displaying data over time will help you create a more compelling study and will often provide more meaningful data. You want to include baseline data and document any adverse events that happened. And you want to also write about your intervention or manipulation fidelity. Did it go as planned? That's something that is important to document in your results section. All right, so now we're on to the discussion section of the QI, or the D in IMRAD. And this is going to answer the question, what do the results mean? You want to evaluate and interpret your results. You want to discuss possible reasons for the lack of success. And if for some reason your study, your implementation is not successful, just know that that does not mean the information isn't valuable. In fact, it's hugely valuable because it's going to show future readers to this paper what they can do differently to perhaps alter that implementation strategy that could make it successful. So even if you don't get the results you were hoping for, by no means does that make it an unsuccessful study, but that is something you want to discuss in the discussion section. You want to explain contextual factors that could have led to the lack of success. For example, perhaps there was a large turnover of staff when you were implementing your QI. Are your results similar or dissimilar to similar studies, and why? If they're similar, what is that saying about the overall field? If they're dissimilar, what is that saying? You want to also offer future direction. So if it was a successful study, you want to talk about what someone might want to do next, where this study could go, where you could build on it. If the study was not successful, this is where you want to potentially direct how to make it successful and what you think had gone wrong in your own study. And then you want to end with a discussion of the importance of your findings. All right, so now we are getting to some more abstract concepts, which are really fun. And the first one I want to address is writing as thinking. So writing is not just a product. It's not just about the final draft. It really is a tool that we need to learn how to utilize and how to put it into practice and how to put it into a process. So we want to use writing to generate ideas and to think through complex thoughts and research. We want to use writing to explore your ideas playfully, to get to know them deeply, and then take a step back and to look at them from a discerning distance or from varying perspective. And that's what's going to take your idea from a two-dimensional concept to really a three-dimensional idea, which you are building your paper around, is that you want to build your paper around an idea that is that complex. And so next, we're going to talk about some strategies for generating these ideas, these complex ideas, and for how to eventually get those complex ideas into content that will eventually become the paper. So these writing techniques are considered more informal writing, but they still count as part of the writing process. We often call them pre-writing. They are crucial for generating ideas and for developing a strong argument, and they are often overlooked or not considered part of the writing process at all. These pre-writing techniques will help you to know your own writing process. And that's really important. That is such a skill and such an asset to understand your writing process in order to communicate these complex ideas. And pre-writing is how we get to a successful rough draft. It is crucial. We really have to spend time pre-writing to even get to that first rough draft, let alone that final draft. All right, so in the activity we're going to go over after this workshop, we're going to define these writing strategies more deeply. This is really an attempt to sort of create a kind of linear process between the first few writing strategies and the last few that get you a little bit closer to drafting. So just bear with me. They will be defined in just a few slides, but I wanted to go ahead and get you accustomed to the naming and to also recommend when they might be the most useful. So I consider these idea generating writing strategies. That's going to be free writing, looping, listing, and clustering. And these are going to allow you to explore your knowledge on a specific subject. And if you don't have a subject, if you have no idea where to start, free writing is the best place to start. These writing techniques are more informal. They create something called a text mess, which is really exciting. You're just putting words on the page and you're kind of sifting through them to see what's meaningful, what lights you up, what gets you excited. You are also more than welcome to use free writing as a means to say, I don't know what I want to say, and trying to see if you write that down, if you let yourself say that unsayable thing, if the ideas actually come after that. And then one recommendation I have is morning pages. It's something that I do most mornings before I start focused writing. And it comes from a book called The Artist's Way. And essentially what you do is the first thing you do, I write in the morning. That's typically when I am the most productive. So I write 3 handwritten pages before I even start my focused writing. And that can be something as basic as I write about my dream, I write about what I have going on that day, something that might be bothering me. And the idea is that we get the clutter out and then we're able to focus on more meaningful writing. And I find them incredibly valuable. Free writing and morning pages are probably the things that I use most. And free writing, even though technically it is an idea generating strategy, I use it throughout my drafting process. And I'll go over that a little bit more as we go forward in the workshop. So these next 2 strategies, I like to call the deepening knowledge writing strategies, and that's going to be cubing and questioning, which help you to look at your subject in new and complex ways. These exercises are going to help you deepen knowledge about your subject, explore the complexity of your subject, but it can also help you narrow your subject if needed. And this is where the first few techniques are about generating the idea, and these 2 techniques are about getting to know that idea incredibly deeply and from different vantage points, so that close up and also considering it far back and from different perspectives. All right. So once we know the idea pretty well, we can start generating some text. So I like to call these text generating writing strategies, and those are going to include outlining, letter writing, and discovery drafting. These are going to help you begin sequencing your ideas within the text, how to deepen your argument, and it's also a step towards your first rough draft. And again, all of these are going to be more deeply defined in the activity that we're doing, but one that I wanted to go ahead and call out is letter writing because I find it so useful. But essentially at this point, you're going to write a letter to a professor, to a peer, to a friend, and you're going to convince them why your idea is important, why your idea is valuable. And this really helps you get comfortable with the idea that our writing is argumentative, and in the way that you can argument a claim, that you are taking a stance, you're making a claim. The letter writing, text generating writing strategy is going to be really wonderful for that in terms of like considering your audience and how to write convincingly with them in mind. All right, so now we are on to the drafting process. So once you've found a subject, you've gotten to know it dynamically and begun to generate text, it's time to begin the drafting process. What is so wonderful about pre-writing and all those strategies is that you're going to have a lot to work with. So whether you are a writer that wants to still start over fresh with all those ideas having been kind of fleshed out with writing, that's one way to do it. Or you might be someone that's going to pull content from the pre-writing and build around it. There's no wrong way in which to utilize the pre-writing in your drafting process. So my coworker Mindy is really going to go over the drafting process more deeply. So I wanted to talk about some more abstract, larger concepts to think about as you begin your drafting process. And the first one I wanted to talk about is creating rituals. So you want to take time to prepare your workspace. Make it comfortable and inviting. A good chair, a hot tea, your favorite pen. Creating a ritual around writing is a way to make it pleasurable and turn it into a habit. Rituals are a way to create low stakes schedules. So, for example, morning coffee, then writing, then an afternoon walk, then editing. For me, my ritual is that I go and get a really nice iced latte and I get out in the world and kind of connect with my barista. And then I sit down to my desk and I begin drafting. And what is ultimately going to happen is you're going to create these associations between the pleasurable thing you're doing with the writing. And pretty soon the writing is going to feel good too. A lot of what rituals are going to do is hopefully take that psychology, take that charge out of the psychology of writing, that it's hard, that it's difficult, that we don't want to do it. I would say start with one small ritual and build from there and observe how much your relationship to writing changes through that. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about in the drafting process is to expect the unexpected. When your mind is starting to make those connections, when you're really starting to get some momentum, digressions are going to happen, and that's okay because digressions can be good. They can lead to deeper research and knowledge. So let writing be about discovery. If your digression or discoveries do not ultimately serve your assignment or subject, they can always be used for projects later in your academic career. So if you kind of go off on a tangent and it is interesting, but it doesn't quite back up or prove your central argument, it's okay to cut it and set it aside. And even if some of these digressions don't ultimately get used, it still helps you reaffirm your original idea because you're able to start to discern what is in service to the larger idea and argument and what is digressive to the larger idea and argument. So even these unexpected discoveries can be good regardless of if they are used in the long term in the specific paper you're working on or any papers in the future as well. So lastly, I want to talk about hitting the wall, which is going to happen. Writing is a process. It can be emotional. It takes time, it takes energy. So if you find yourself stuck, go back to free writing. Writing is not a linear process, but a series of steps and tools that help you build a solid argument, which becomes the foundation of a solid paper. So as I mentioned earlier, free writing is the thing that I use most to solve my writing problems. It's the thing I use to generate, to get my idea, to deepen my idea, but it's also as I'm writing a paper and there's a section I'm really stuck on, or my sections aren't flowing, I will free write to try to figure out what I think the problem is, what I'm missing, and often always I'm able to discover what I'm missing, what I need through free writing. One of the things I discover through free writing, but also if I hit the wall in general, is that I might need to do more research. Perhaps you're missing a crucial component of your argument, or you just need some inspiration. Oftentimes, if I hit a wall outside of free writing, I will pick up a book that is related to my subject and I will read. And 9 times out of 10, I'm inspired by what I read and it gets me writing again. You might want to go outside and get out of your head and be stimulated in other ways, like feel the sun on outside and get some fresh air. And something that's also really helpful is to talk out loud to a friend or peer. Some of us are talk out loud to think. I know that I am one of those people. So call a peer, call a friend, and talk your idea out loud, and you might be able to solve it in real time. So the next thing I want to talk about is reading like a writer. So we want to be reading for content and for structure. We want to be using the literature in your field as a model for your own writing. You want to be referencing your style guide. Some questions you might consider asking yourself are, what does the writing look like? What are the values of your field? What style do you like? So again, as you're reading literature, as you're researching, really be aware and conscious of what you're reading and how these articles are structured, and borrow the structure. So when we are reading like a writer, the other thing that is important to read for is the presence of voice. So listen for the writer's personal voice or style as you're reading. Note the stylistic differences between the articles you're reading. What does that do for the articles? Don't be afraid to inject your own style into your academic writing. That's what makes it unique, valuable, and readable. Oftentimes, as academic writers, I think this is sometimes the hardest part, is how to inject our own voice, our own style, our own personality into academic writing. And something I recommend is, if you aren't quite sure what your style is, to mimic styles that you admire as you're reading. That is how anyone's going to learn how to be a good writer, is to borrow and refine, kind of like the QI, to borrow, refine until you really end up at your own style. The other thing I recommend as we're reading for voice and reading like a writer is to recognize when we're being critical, when we don't like something, and to offer a developmental edit. So if there's a sentence we don't like, or an idea we don't like, or a transition between two sections that we don't like, we should offer that writer in our minds a suggestion, what we might do differently. That's going to be how we learn. And that is something I take with me with most things I'm reading, as I try to learn from the things that I'm picking up on that I don't like. So the next thing I want to talk about is writing ideas first. And so in order to push into writing in complex sentences, we need to be writing with ideas in mind and not grammar. Use these pre-writing techniques to allow your writing to attempt to render your complex ideas in text, and then retrofit the grammar to the idea. Do not write with grammar in mind. That's going to hem in your idea in a way that might affect clarity and really sacrifice the content, which is the most meaningful part of these papers, not the grammar. The grammar is very low on the totem pole of values in terms of writing. It is important. It is our job as writers to know grammar, but we want to be really prioritizing ideas, our ideas, and then retrofitting the grammar. So one thing that's helpful is you can read for complex sentences in your field's literature and write down sentences you like and try to discern the mechanics of it. And then you can mimic it. In some of those pre-writing strategies, you can write down some of their sentences and then write your own sentence that looks like it, and try to figure out why they used that semicolon, why they used that em dash. And that's really how we're going to learn how to write more complexly, is by studying what we're reading and implementing it and being ideas and writing with ideas first. All right, so that's the end of the workshop, and I really wish I could be there to facilitate this activity because I think it's going to be a lot of fun. But I wanted to go ahead and walk you through it just so you get an idea of what the expectations are. So in this activity, we're going to be getting to know those pre-writing strategies that I mentioned, and your group's facilitator will walk you through the details, but it is an exercise in generating ideas and implementing the strategy that speaks most to you. So you're going to go ahead and open your Norton Field Guide to Writing and turn to page 199. And you're going to take about 15 minutes to read through the pre-writing strategies listed between pages 199 and 204. And what I want you to do is I want you to start out by free writing for 15 minutes. And if you'd like, you can think about writing about a day in your life on the job, or you can just free write what comes top of mind. There's really no wrong way to do it. And then after those 15 minutes, I want you to take 5 to 10 minutes to look at what you wrote and see if there's an idea in there that you can then move to a different strategy, a different pre-writing strategy, to deepen your relationship with that idea. So you can do something like listing, you can even move it to cubing or questioning. And if for some reason that first free write didn't generate an idea, then you're going to free write again. So you're either going to free write again for 15 minutes, you're going to move that idea that you generated from the first free write and move it into a different strategy and see if it grows that idea any further, if it deepens your knowledge. So it's a really fun activity. I hope you enjoy it. And thank you so much for your time. And I hope you have a wonderful retreat.